Hi guys, welcome back to the High Grade podcast. We're filming a very special episode today in light of what's been happening. So we're filming an episode for Black Lives Matter. Now, this podcast is to educate, to empower, and to give our views on what's happening in the world right now. This podcast is in memory of George Floyd. This podcast is in memory of Sandra Bland, Trayvon Martin, Stephen Lawrence, Mark Duggan, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery. This podcast is for me, it's for ourselves, it's for our families, our future children, our children, and for all those to come. So I really hope you enjoy it. I hope you take something from it. And yeah.
Amazing. So we are joined by two very special guests. So we have Keiran Johnson and Maya Underwood. I will give them an opportunity to introduce themselves, but just to give some background context. So I studied at the University of Miami, in which I met Maya, and we've stayed good friends ever since. And Keiran, he is my brother-in-law, but I'm going to give them a sort of platform to sort of introduce themselves, let you know what they do, and then we're going to jump straight in. So Keiran, do you want to go first and introduce yourself?
Hi guys. My name's Keiran Johnson. I'm 31 years old. I work as a facilities officer in a building in London, let's say. I don't want to give up too much information. I'm just a young guy in London, basically. So you'll get my views on how I see things, basically.
Hi, my name is Maya. I'm 26 years old. I am actually, I wear a few hats, but my day job, as you can say, I'm an educator here in America, and I'm actually a beauty queen as well. So I hold like a title. I do a lot of pageantry, and I work in fitness. So
yeah, queen. Okay, so just to really kick things off, basically, I think we're going to go with you, Keiran, first, and then Maya, obviously, if you do have anything to add, you can obviously jump in. But essentially, Keiran, what was it like for you growing up as a child who was Black?
So basically, I'll start by saying, as a child, I was taught and shown a lot of things, but racism up front and personal, I didn't see it other than what I was being taught. Like, nobody was really racist to my face. I couldn't really get a grasp of what the racism I was being taught in books and the movies, Roots and stuff because obviously we're living in England. As I grew older and you could say I matured, I started to get a better education on life in itself and little decisions that you see being made in life. And when you get to higher education, for instance, when you start going into the workplace, stuff like that. So I'll start off by saying I started in a place called Stonebridge, northwest of London. People will class it as the hood. It's like, Maya will probably understand it as a project. It's like concrete jungles, flats on flats on flats on, high rises everywhere. Oh. I grew up seeing what people in nowadays, I'd say, idolize and sort of look to as something to be empowered by, which was poverty, pissy stairways, pissy lifts, I don't know a better way to say it, needles everywhere, just that sort of lifestyle. Then I moved on to Wembley, which was more suburban per se, a little bit, but still into an estate. As I grew older, I started to gather, like, because of the friendship group I had and stuff growing up on this estate, and most of us are still friends to today. We're boys, clique, gang, whatever you want to call it. We all live different lives. We're still a pact, if you want to say. And I looked at it and I said, you know what? My estate that I grew up on, that we moved to and settled in Wembley, is mainly Black mums with single young boys. With single Black mums, I should say, with young boys. So the stuff that sort of happens from that sort of stuff when you're very young, that you might not even see as gang culture, or because the bond you're forming together, the brotherhood, like, not everyone, let's say there's 30 of us. I know there's levels of what all the 30 would do, but the pain that one would feel for the rest of the 30 would lead to all 30 doing the same thing. So just, I'd say London wasn't a place that racism was thrown in my face until I got to an age where I really understood it.
But I think you've shared a lot of stories with me personally about sort of your experience of education, and how, you know, you were quite badly behaved and you were excluded quite a lot of the time. And I know a conversation that we've had, you having a double-barreled surname, how that has also impacted you. So what would be your perspective on that?
Basically, okay, I'll go with the school stuff first. I was a bit of a naughty problem child, or what they'd call or class a naughty child. I don't believe I was naughty. I believe I was maybe socially challenged, maybe challenged within my education. I think I was good at a lot of stuff and then challenged at some stuff. So maybe that problem child maybe developed in the classroom. I went from school to school as a young child. I went to 4 primary schools. I was kicked out of each one for, my thing was always mainly with authority. It wasn't really with the children. I was quite maybe seen as one of the popular children. I was quite friendly with all the children, but I was 8 years old when I was kicked out of my first primary school for kicking my head teacher in his kneecap. And I say this, I'm a grown man now that has a job, and I would one day like to have kids, and I would never tell them that this is the right thing to do. But looking back on this and now speaking with my mum about this, who was in the room at the time and stuff, I was almost forced into the situation. I was an 8-year-old child who was placed in a lobby for every single recess, you'd call it, or lunch break. What do you want to call it? Every break playtime that we had, I was placed in a lobby between the head teacher's office, and reception. And in this break time, there would be about, on average, I'd say about 20, 25 kids every break time. And this ranged from year 2 to year 6. And the things that used to happen in that lobby, one day I had enough. I couldn't take it no more. I was one of the young children in there. Fighting happened, everything happened. One day I couldn't take it, and I ran out to the playground and I played outside. I was a kid, I played outside. The head teacher called my mum, and my mum, she was a young black woman trying to make it in life, and she was doing her best by her children and stuff like that, but she was trying to educate herself, trying to work. She was frustrated. Why is her child bad? And she came and she actually put her hands on me that day in front of a lot of people. And I was so embarrassed that I vowed, I went to sleep that night and I said, next, he's going to feel my wrath tomorrow. And I went from, I believe that I wasn't kicking him because I thought I was badder than him, bigger than him. I just believe that anger came out. And this is what I'm seeing now. I only wanted to relay this story for the purpose of what I'm seeing now a lot in the George Floyd situation in America and the rioting that's going on and the anger that's being protested, and people want to cause fires, people want to see uprise. And when I look at them, I find it very hard to blame, because once anger is built up, suppressing that anger, I should say, is very difficult. I don't want to say that racism doesn't exist, because it clearly exists. I've dealt with it in other stages of life. But we can't lose the sight of it's humanity against inhumanity at the end of the day. My double-barreled surname now, I feel when I was young, it used to challenge me. I didn't like it. I think that it showed like that I had a mum and a dad and not a family. And then as I got a bit older and I got into like starting to apply for jobs and stuff, I realized that a lot of people from power have double-barreled surnames. I get a lot of people look at me different. I don't think they expect a black boy to walk through the door when I turn up at most of my interviews. My name's Irish, essentially Keiran, and Scottish. My 2 slave names are Scottish, Duncan Johnson. I don't believe that they're expected. I think they're expecting Jermaine, Jaquan. Do you know what I'm trying to say? And I think that's a problem as well, that, okay, I get an interview because my name's Keiran Johnson, but does Jaquan, I don't want to give any name, like not to hold anything against him, but is that fair? Or does Olufuwemwe Olubembe get the job in the same place?
I think you raise a good point, and it is something that is quite prevalent, because just by looking at someone's name on a CV, it's like you almost make an instant judgment of what you think this person is like, and all you've seen is their name. And because that's at the top of their CV, you don't bother looking at the qualifications, their experience. You're just like, oh, that name doesn't really sound right. So actually, yeah, they go into the no pile. Maya, for you then, what was it like growing up as a child Black? And obviously you've got a different perspective because you're in America.
Yeah, it's actually quite interesting. My experience is totally opposite of his. So I had to come to terms. So my mother's an immigrant. My mother's from Trinidad. So my family, one half of my family is not from here. My father is a Black American, but he's also a Black American that served in the military and has 3 of the highest honors you can get in the military. So my experience being Black and American, kind of understanding how I'm supposed to move in America is very different. I was born in New York, and I grew up there for a little bit of time. And then we moved to Florida when I was about 5 or 6 years old. And I remember going to school. I hated it down here. And I think part of me not liking it is because I wasn't readily accepted. So I had to come to terms with my Blackness when I was 5. So the first memory that I really have of moving down here and what my experience was like moving to Florida specifically, so obviously the North and the South, still very different, was like the first day of school. I had like 2 Black girls come up to me and they go, "Are you Black?" And I'm like, "Excuse me, what?" Now, obviously, I have like this thick New York accent. I guess I carried myself differently, and I'm 5, mind you. And I'm like, I think so. Like, my skin is dark, like trying to understand the concept of what Black being meant. I'm like, if it's just beyond my skin, I don't know what that really means. And I had to go home and ask my mom, "Hey, Mom, are we Black?" Like, I know. So my concept has been, I'm Trinidadian and I'm American. You know what I mean? It's always been my ethnicity is not necessarily my race. So, and then from there, my experience with my peers, my closest friend was a Hispanic male and a Black male growing up. And I guess my bullying at that age was because I wasn't Black enough. And so it was just very strange in that dynamic. So my first experience with coming to my Blackness was when I was by my peers. It was from my peers. And then the first time I think I experienced racism was in the 3rd grade. So at the time I was 8, maybe going on 9. I couldn't understand why this teacher hated me. I didn't understand it. And I mean, my teacher despised me. And I remember her mumbling the N-word under her breath. And she mumbled it at a time. Yeah, she mumbled it at a time. I guess all of the students in the class had failed this huge math test that we had. And I actually got a perfect score on the test. I went to elementary school, my middle school, and my high school were majority Black kids. Whites were actually the minority in a lot of my schools. So that even makes things a little different. Now, I existed in, like, outside of sports when it came to music and it came to performing arts, which I did a lot of as a kid. Those were my white spaces. And I say white spaces in that I, a lot of the time, was the only Black girl there, or the only Black person there. And functioning in those spaces is when I kind of started coming to terms with, okay, I look different from everybody else. They kind of turn a nose and kind of are not as open to greeting me, speaking to me. So that, and I was maybe around 5th or 6th grade is when I came to that. So, it kind of transcend my decisions later in life, like going to the University of Miami. A lot of the time people told me I should go to an HBCU, a historically Black college university. And honestly, I didn't want to, because I wanted to see what life was like outside of my experience, outside of being amongst a bunch of Black people. I hate to say it that way, but that was my experience. I try with this movement. There are things that I feel like I can't express in my experiences because I don't want that disconnect to be the forefront of what's happening. You know what I mean? And I tell people all the time, yes, I'm Trinidad and yes, I'm American. But if I find myself in circumstances like being pulled over by a cop, none of that matters. I'm Black. You know what I mean? At the end of the day, they see a Black woman. So with that being my experience, that's ultimately my first struggle. Now, I felt maybe when I was younger, I felt like my first struggle was trying to get people to understand, like, hey, there's so many layers to me. Like, why don't you get to know me? But then coming to realize they don't care because at the end of the day, you're Black.
Wow, that's like so much to just consume in like you just telling me this story. I feel like it's not even about just being black now. It's just there's so many different parts to it, particularly if you are in America. You touched on the fact that you're obviously a beauty queen, you do pageantry. So you having you had more sort of positive experiences growing up black. How has sort of your blackness now impacted you in your sort of pageantry?
As far as, I feel like I kind of was more ready for pageantry because of my decision of going to the University of Miami. I feel like if I went to an HBCU, I wouldn't understand so much what it is to be black and actually feel like a minority, because I went to schools where blacks were the majority. So a lot of that outward racism I didn't have to deal with. Did I experience it? Yes, for some teachers, maybe, you know, going to a park or something like that. But as far as really being safe from it, I felt very guarded from that. Whereas at Miami, total opposite experience, which is part of the reason why I went there. I just didn't expect it to be as opposite as I anticipated. And pageantry, one of the conversations, kind of the unspoken rule, I call it, is that you don't know how to present yourself, even down to whether you're going to have straight hair, if you're going to go in with your natural hair, is a huge concern. Like, you have to go to coaches, and these are conversations whereas more so my non-black counterparts is, well, I'm going to wear my hair how I feel like wearing my hair because my hair is accepted. Whereas we have to think about, should we wear curly hair? If it's curly hair, how curly should it be? Should it be my natural hair? Should I wear a wig? So I feel like now certain systems are really more accepting of women of color and women of color in their natural form. But there are certain times where, and one of my counterparts even said this, that when you walk into a room, that is kind of a small voice in the back of your head, like, how much harder do I have to work? How much careful do I have to be because I am the only black face, or I'm one of the few black faces in the room? You know, you kind of wonder how many eyes are on you or are not on you because of kind of walking that fine line of what it is to be a black woman. A girl has expressed to me that I'm one of the first black people she's ever met. And so for me, that's like, what? Like, she was just like, yeah, it's almost like, could you imagine like seeing dragons on TV all the time, and then you see a dragon in person? Yeah. That's like how she described it to me. And I'm like, oh my God. Like, whereas I'm in a melting pot, I'm in South Florida. So you see a little bit of everything, but there are spaces in America where black people don't exist. So it's just mind blowing in that aspect. It's just walking a fine line in pageantry. It's really interesting.
Keiran, what about you then? Growing up, being black, and now obviously when Maya touched on, when you walk into a room, how many people are looking at you or are not looking at you? So your experiences growing up, how has that sort of shaped who you are now?
I'd say now it's made me very strong as a person. I'll be honest, like in my childhood, I had a lot of times where even I'd say in my family, I had like, not racism, but it's a bit of colorism. Like, I'm very dark skinned, and in my family, or even just my friends, but it wouldn't be like racism, but you know what I mean? Or because they were light skinned, they'd feel a bit better or something. But I guess the way I was growing up, especially my dad's mum, the stuff she showed me and taught me growing up, I never felt somebody lighter skinned than me was better than me. Never. I knew they maybe judged as better than me, but I could never put it in the back of my head that that's the way it goes. And I think that shaped the man I am today, because a lot of people are going to put up like the stuff that I saw yesterday, like Black Lives Matter and this and that. I'm not saying don't be part of a movement. I'm just saying make sure that movement goes into your everyday life. Like, Shinnel, you know me a bit better, and I'm not going to go too far, but I'm fighting the building out the job by the establishment, I'll call it, because it's actual establishment in this country, and I work for them, and I'm fighting them right now because I won't stand for how they treat people who are like me, and they expect them just to be nobody and have no voice. Now, the establishment, I've been off for 6 months. At the moment, I'm fighting the case. They know that I am not like the rest, as in I won't give in, and I'll fight right until the very death. And I think that's only because of the upbringing I had, was that don't settle for letting anybody tell you. And also a pound coin, just getting a wage at the end of the month, I can get another job. I'm 31. I've had 5 jobs. Do you know what I'm trying to say? It's not the end of life. Nobody is going to be more than me in a room just because of their title, wage bracket, tax bracket. it doesn't make you more than me. So I think we do have a lot of racism in England. Growing up, I mean, the police would bother us for no reason. I've been pulled over countless times. My house has been raided countless times.
Wow.
The effect that it's had on, and let me tell you something, a story actually. I went through this with my mum the other day. My dad left the country shortly after this to live in Canada because the police were, armed police came to my house basically because my dad was suspected to have had a firearm. Now, I know they do background checks on who would be in the house, who may or not be in the house, what may be happening in the house. My younger brother was months old at the time, Kyle. I'm only 4 years older than him, so I was about 4. And I told my mum I can remember the German shepherds running up the stairs and jumping on the bed with me and Kyle on it. I remember, she said, what more do you remember? I told her the bed sheets. She said, how on earth can you remember that at 4 years old?
Wow.
Now, I didn't even know I remember that. That's in my subconscious. And that's my first involvement with the police in this country. And now I know for sure, if that had been a white lady, my mum, at 22 years old with a 4-year-old and a couple of months old baby, the background check would have been, don't go in there so hard with the dogs and the firearms pointed at the babies. And do you understand what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
we do have a lot of systemic racism over here. We have a lot of, and it's for all peoples of color in this country. We have a lot of systemic racism that goes on. I come from a place where I talk away a certain way, and we all have a work voice when we go to, you know what I mean? We have a work voice. We put it on. We answer the phone in a certain way. We even the way we answer emails and stuff. We have a work way, but you also have who you are. I am who I am at all levels, all the time. So sometimes I've been in meetings where I've maybe wanted to raise my point, and I felt like somebody thought they was gonna miss my point. And then at this point, I've seen a lot where people will hold back. People will be nobody. And I am not willing to be that nobody. So I will say, and my point will be heard basically. And then you have higher ups who think, who's he? Who does he think he is? Mm. And just a lot of that has basically led me into, I'd say, managers nitpicking on things, that trying to find a way, basically. They can't criticize your performance. They can't criticize your punctuality. So they find something. I've had, not this particular occasion, but I've been called into HR. And remember, we're supposed to be adults at work. This is when I knew age is just a number. I think Usain Bolt had won a race the day before. I think we were reading the papers at work or whatever. And I'd said I don't even remember what I said because it wasn't that important, but apparently I'd said something along the lines of, yeah, Jamaicans are the fastest, whatever. I was probably just, you know what I'm saying, it's patriotic. Usain Bolt's one. We have a little look at the paper after. I was called into HR. I had a hearing. In my workplace, you have hearings. There's no everything's a hearing. It's like court. I was put through court basically. I might as well just go on the road and sell drugs if that's what I'm going to have to deal with in the workplace.
Wow.
And that's how it is in England.
So you touched on this whole systematic racism thing, and that kind of touches me because I'm an educator. Maya, you've just mentioned that you're an educator as well. And I think a lot of this sort of racism is ingrained into us when we are so young. And then you go into school and it's like this unconscious bias is just reinforced, even down to the things that we're taught. It's almost as seen as it's only the white people that do things great in history. Columbus was the one that founded America, but actually he founded America when there was already people living in this place called America. So now I'm in between a rock and a hard place because as an educator, so I am a head of sixth form, so I deal with kids who are aged between 16 and 18. Do I do what's right by my kids and say, look, when you go out there, the world is going to be a crazy place. And in order for you to be successful in what society today sees as successful, do I tell them you have to have a work voice? You can't wear your hair a certain way. You shouldn't have your nails long. You shouldn't essentially be who you are so that you can get places. Or do I tell them, be who you are, live in your skin, have your hair the way you want it to be. Just be who you are, and in the end, you're going to get somewhere. What do I tell them?
It's, you know what, it's so funny that you say that. I am a medical academy teacher. So basically I'm preparing kids to go into college with a pre-med track. So I've always wanted to work with children, whether it was nonprofit education. Education wasn't my first go around, like my first choice. But I always told myself that the one thing that I would do is tell my kids to just be themselves. And then getting to college and realizing like, maybe sometimes you can't be yourself. Not that I already didn't know that. It's just that I didn't know how much it wasn't accepted. And just, I think for me, the biggest thing is just pouring into my students and having them understand, regardless of what anybody may think about you, you are enough. And walk in the room as if you are enough. You know, some people may not like it. They may think you're uppity. They may think you're bougie. They may think, you know, whatever the case is, but that is their opinion of you. But when you place yourself, or when you act as though you're supposed to be in certain positions in life, they have no choice. You know, they can't deny you. You know, at that point, they're saying, oh, well, if she feels this way about herself, and no matter how hard they may try, if you are rooted in understanding who you are and what you deserve to have, then, you know, they're going to have a hard time knocking you down. Not saying that you're not going to get knocked down sometimes.
I think that's such good advice, but I think we have to go back to like the nitty gritty of like, it actually shocks me. Like I'm sitting here, like my heart's racing a little bit. I'm feeling a bit angry. Like I'm feeling a bit upset. Like, I don't know what to say.
Yeah.
Like, how is it even a thing that we even have to have the conversation, that we have to act a certain way because of the color of our skin? Like, do white people sit there and have the same conversation? How is that fair? How is that even a thing? That I struggle to get my head around it, how we've ended up to a point where we actually have to ask ourselves the question, do we tell them to act a different way because of the color of their skin, but we're not having the same conversations for people that are not black? Like, that is absolutely crazy to me. I don't get it. Like, I'm sitting here, my heart's like, it's just insane. Like, I think it's disgusting, and it just gets me so mad. And I just don't understand that we've actually got to a place in 2020 where we're still having these conversations. I think it's disgusting.
I think a lot of it, from my personal experience, like from being a Black Caribbean boy, and speaking to my older generations, as in uncles, granduncles, grandfather and stuff, Jamaican people have always had a certain stigma on them as being aggressive. Yardies, terms what you hear. Most people that have never been to Jamaica, you think of a Jamaican as a yardie, and when you get to Jamaica, it's yardie and Jamaica.
Right.
But you think, no, they're all rough, they're all bad. But these things come from like times when like you had the Maroons who were breakaway slaves and stuff. So we have always had a stigma as being unruly, and we're not gonna stick to the law, and these things carry on century on century, 100 years on 100 years, and they go into people's minds in different ways in different societies, and they just say it in a different way. And now it's just a term of, yeah, you're a yardie, you're bad, Jamaicans are all bad. And do you know what I mean? I think it comes from a deeper place a lot of the time.
You know, Shan, to kind of touch on what you were saying, like, I think what escapes people's mind is the timeline of desegregation, of, you know, accepting Black people as human beings. You have to think about 400 years of slavery, right? And I always put it in perspective in this way. My grandmother was born in 1923. My mother was born in 1965. The Civil Rights Act was signed in 1968. So you think about, you know, what the transition of time, you know, we have like, this is like slavery. And then this is like the time that Blacks had to be free in this country, and the same opportunities that other people have in this country. So my mother and her siblings are now reaching retirement age, right? So, and they were born in the time before the Civil Rights Act was passed. So in other words, the people that were beaten and bruised and killed and you know, just all sorts of disgusting acts that were against these people are still very much alive, are somebody's grandparents, you know, and not even necessarily great grandparents yet. So you have to understand that this cycle of teaching your children that, hey, blacks are less than is still very much a thing. These are conversations that parents are still having with their kids. And now coming to the age of being an adult, I have to remember that some of my peers, their grandparents were people that beat people that look like me. You know, their parents were people that beat people that look like me. So when we kind of frame that as to we're really only the second generation in to having equal opportunity, as they like to call it, but I can get into that too. We're only in the second generation in. We can't have these high expectations. Sadly, I hate to say it, but I feel like that's the reality of it. We can't have these high expectations.
With that being said, then, do you think people should almost just accept the fact that maybe in their lifetime, they're never going to see equal opportunities between those who are their more privileged counterparts? Do you think that's just a fact that people need to accept?
No, absolutely not. I think that what is happening right now is necessary. A lot of people are, let me clarify, I do not feel like looting and rioting are acceptable acts. I don't believe in violence. I don't condone it. At the end of the day, when Colin Kaepernick was on his knee, he was exiled, not just from his job, but from the country. People were burning his jersey. You know what I mean? When we were, I don't even know, what year did you get to Miami?
2014.
Were you there with the riots that year? Or the
I don't think so, no.
So we had, like, I was protesting in college. So with peaceful protest, for so long, you know, at this point, and then on top of that, people are out of work here. We've been locked up in our houses for months at a time. And then this happens, people are angry and they don't have anything to lose. So if it takes this in order for us to see the change that we need to see, then I'm okay with it. Because I think once we start accepting that idea, because then we get comfortable. I don't believe in being comfortable. The uncomfort is necessary. I think that, and, you know, when people tell me, well, you know, the Civil Rights Act and all this, and Martin Luther King didn't riot. Okay, let me spit it to you this way. Martin Luther King was assassinated. There was 6 days of rioting, $47 million in damage. On that 6th day is when they passed the Civil Rights Act. So for me, it's just kind of like, you can give me this preaching of the looting and rioting and it being wrong. When people are angry, you can't expect them to act accordingly. It's like when a child is throwing a tantrum. You don't beat the child. You don't punish the child when the child is throwing a tantrum. You figure out what the child wants in order for the child to move on, to progress forward, to understand. So you have a large majority of people, and not just Black people, who are tired of oppression, who are tired of the injustices that people face in this country. It's especially Black people, and it's time to stand up and say something. So this time is necessary. I hate to say it, a lot of people disagree with me, like, oh, we need peace and this, that, the other. Peace ain't solved a goddamn thing. I hate to say it, but it hasn't. It hasn't solved anything thus far. And if this is what it takes in order for us to see the changes, then we move forward. Breonna Taylor's case has just reopened. All 4 officers have been charged. They increased Derek Chauvin's charge to 2nd-degree murder. So you can't tell me that this stuff doesn't work. You know what I mean? Like, it's hard to convince me of that when I'm just like, well, when Colin was on his knee, y'all were saying he was shaming, you know, the people that have fought for this country. When you have Black people who fought for this country and couldn't even vote. That I think the uncomfort is necessary. I think what is happening right now in this country is extremely necessary. And I think that to a magnitude, people are revealing their face. You know, I've lost so many friends. I've had arguments with friends that aren't of color, and I'm kind of glad it's happening because now I understand what that acceptance looks like.
I was going to say, I don't personally agree with violence, but I do agree with what everyone is doing right now: the looting, the rioting, the peaceful protests, the non-peaceful protests. Because I think if people have a bigger problem with people rioting than they do with the actual problem at hand, which is the oppression of Black people
Right.
being killed left, right, and centre, then that in itself is a problem. And like you said, like, this has been the biggest civil rights movement in history. All 50 states in America are writing. There's 18 countries that are participating in the Black Lives Matter protests. And I think, like you said, this has brought change. We're not there yet. We're nowhere near where we need to be.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's the beginning of change. So I think it was needed. I hope it carries on. I hope, and it does make a change. Is there anyone on here that disagrees and thinks that the rioting and looting shouldn't happen?
Okay, I think people act in a way that mirrors their emotions. And so I don't condone any type of violence, but I think if you've been oppressed for so long, and it's not just you, but then it's your parent and your parents' parents, and you're seeing it happening all over the world. And I think when things happen in America, you know, I'm almost thankful that people here, or the police here don't carry guns, because I just think if they did, what would be left of this world if they did? But then when I see it happening in America, I just think you just have to do what you have to do. In order to incite change, you have to do things that have never happened before. And if that means looting, rioting, then if it brings a change, everyone is going to be okay with it in the end, isn't it?
And at the end of the day, it's property. Those are things. Those can be replaced. You know what I mean? The lives that have been lost in this cannot be replaced at all.
We're in 2020, and people have to realize that we're all living a certain type of life now. This is very modern world. Like, but I'm gonna. How do I say this? In history, the history that we've been taught anyway, there's been no major change ever without warfare. Call it what you want. Warfare is what's made why the country we live in has a monarchy. They're terrorists, essentially. The Queen, the Prince William, his grandfathers, his ancestors, they're terrorists. They went to people's countries under the biggest diamond on the crown on our Queen's head, on our money. It's from Africa. They're terrorists. They don't own England now. And I'm not saying we should want to own anything, but I'm just saying don't believe you're going to be given anything. In whatever way you decide to fight, please fight for what you want.
I think on this sort of idea of this whole systematic racism, and obviously people sort of taking action at whatever action that looks like, whether you're rioting, looting, protesting peacefully, or whatever it is, do you think that we, or Black people in general, sometimes sort of enable this stuff happening by sort of idolizing a Eurocentric type of culture?
No, we didn't enable it because it's already something that was deep into progress. But once you are in the white man's world and everything before now, okay, culture is very hip hop. It's very, as I said to you the other day, Shinnel, I go around the world and everyone knows what I mean when I go like that to them. That's from Jamaica. That means don't touch my hand. You understand? But everyone around the world understand respect or touch me or hello. You go, everyone in England says, wow, go on. No matter what they look like in England.
America too.
Wow. Yeah, so we know our culture is going to rub off and stuff. So, how do I say it for better terms? We just have to know that a lot of what's happened, we're in a white man's world and he's shown us his way. We live his way. We eat his way. It's things that we've been shown. It's taught behavior. Mainly on the TV when I was growing up. I tell you the women who I fancied, Keiran Johnson, the woman on the Gladiators. She's a blonde, blue-eyed woman. When I look at her today, Sarah Michelle Gellar, and I'm not saying there's no problem. I still fancy women, you know me, of all, you know me. I'm not going to be, but why was the two women who I fancy, they look almost exactly the same? Maybe because that's all I saw. So it's a lot of it is, we do now, it's hard for me, like I was saying to my mum the other day, mum, look at that picture of you when you got your short hair like Eva Apio, you look nice, get your hair short. She's like, you think? I'm like, get your hair short, man, it's natural. But who am I I don't want to take away a woman's beauty if she feels like, I have to have this long hair because she's also been subjected to this for hundreds of years, that is better than what I have. It's a difficult subject.
I think that I actually agree. I believe that Eurocentric ideas and removing them from all cultures, not just Black culture, all cultures, is going to take time. I think that is not our fight right now. Does that make sense? There are pieces of it that will be in there that have to be dismantled in order for us to see systematic change. Right. I think there are pieces in there, but when it comes to, like he said, like kind of fantasizing about somebody that doesn't look like you, or whether we're wearing straight hair, curly hair, lighter skin and everything else, I think that is not our biggest issue right now. I feel like that is within each culture, that is kind of like a dynamic that they have to understand, because at the end of the day, within each culture, you kind of have to accept what you look like, right? Like you can't expect, and you can have a conversation, but the understanding of like the pieces that an Asian would take from Eurocentric ideas and the pieces that a Black would take from Eurocentric ideas are going to be different in the aspect that they don't look alike. So their goal is to get to looking like this or acting a certain way. So I think that, yes, there are pieces in the system that are there, but as far as Eurocentric ideals within a culture, I think is kind of like a, let's deal with that tomorrow. Let's deal with systematic issues right now so people can get into the places that they need to be in order to elicit real change.
I have a question for both of you, actually, and I think that would be, what is it like being Black in 2020? What is it like being a Black person in 2020? Keiran, do you want to go first?
Do you want the cliches?
Well,
Do you want the cliches like
it's just whatever's in your heart, whatever's in your head, whatever comes to mind. Like,
cliches are in my heart.
Then say them.
A young man going to a nightclub with his friends in London. Now we have to split up. We find girls in the queue, girls who we don't even know, and we're like, okay, can I? Yeah, I'm with you. Yeah, can I just to get in? It's cool. Yeah, I'll get your drink and we get in. Like, we're doing all sorts just to make sure we can get into a club in central London, because I don't know, central London's not a place for young Black boys, or because 10 of us at once, there's definitely going to be a fight. But right next to me, and then they're going to tell me, maybe your footwear. And then right next to me, you're letting in Harry and John and Jack, all 50 of them with ketamine in their pockets, Charlie up their nose already. You can see half of it. I'm just being honest, you know. I know it's funny. I'm trying to put a lighter mood on the end, but being Black in England is driving around knowing you're going to get stopped one day, eventually, countless times, maybe for nothing. Being Black in England is feeling like everyone feels like you got a chip on your shoulder. That's the main one I hear from English white people, that Black people have a chip on their shoulder. I didn't hear that till quite later on in my life. I must be honest, and I had to understand, what does that mean that I've got a chip on my shoulder? How? But yeah, that's another one that goes on, and you got to make sure you tone down yourself as a Black person in England, because if you are assertive, outward, you are going to be seen as a problem is not the right word. You're going to be seen as almost opposition. That's what you're going to be seen as.
On that topic of chip on your shoulder, because you've started hearing that now, do you sometimes feel like you don't address things that people say, or you don't engage in conversations that might lead to people saying to you, "Oh, Keiran, you've got a chip on your shoulder"?
Yeah, but as well, I tend not to go into conversations, because as well, not that I have the deepest understanding on a lot of things, but a lot, like in high school, I was telling a lot of the kids what to watch and read and stuff. Just that most of their parents hadn't. In England, we don't. It's not like America. I know in America they have, like, we don't have no African American studies or English or Caribbean. So we don't know. You ain't taught nothing about no Black person. You ain't taught about history before 1066, Battle of Hastings.
Wow.
You are taught the white man conquered. He became the power, and that's what you're taught over here. So
I think for me, this week has been overwhelming. It's been, I never thought that I would get to a point in my life where, and I think this is probably the emotional part for me, I'd have to call my friends, and every friend that I have or every family that I have to do a mental health check-in. I think that for me is just overwhelming because you're very angry, you're very sad, you're very happy because things are changing. So you kind of go through like these up and downs of emotions, even up until this morning. Like I was so nauseous that I couldn't even eat anything. A lot of my friends aren't sleeping. A lot of my friends aren't eating. We're losing relationships. We are seeing like double faces of people that we've trusted. So right now it's just overwhelming because there's more than one wound. I had a friend when I called her to check on her, and like we just started crying on the phone because she, like what she said kind of hit home, was that she feels like all of her racial experiences that she's had in her life, she's had to internalize over the weekend. And when she said that, for me, it kind of hit me. I'm like, that's really what it feels like. Because you, when you go through the racial experiences, it's kind of like little nicks here and there. You know what I mean? It's like a paper cut. You know, it's just kind of like, okay, it hurts. You know, it's there. But then at the end of the day, it's a paper cut. Whereas now it feels like you're opening up this huge scar that you never really addressed. I think also part of that, especially being a Black woman, it's exhausting. I say exhausting because I'm tired of having to explain. Like some people, I'm comfortable having the conversation. I think my personality allows me to have the conversation for my non-Black friends that don't understand and want to understand. Because I think at the end of the day, I accept that as my responsibility as a Black woman, that, hey, if you want all this change, then you have to point somebody in the right direction, or at least educate them on the history. That's me. Whereas I have friends who don't want to have the conversation and they don't want to explain because we've been explaining for so long, and that's okay. You know what I mean? So it's just very exhausting having to explain every day, having to be, you know, there are shows that even talk about this where like you're the only Black person in one of my favorite shows is Insecure. And in one of the first episodes, she kind of explains like, I'm the only Black person that works in my job. And they have a scene to go, hey, Issa, what's on fleek? Like, and she had to explain that. And it's just like, it's annoying. Like, it's just kind of like, why don't you just look it up? You know, why don't you do the work? And especially because I had to do the work to understand who I am, to fully accept the person that I am, you know, because of the color of my skin. I didn't have somebody to explain to me, you know, where braids came from, where cornrows came from. I didn't have somebody to explain to me, you know, the roots of where my heritage actually is, why my hair is curly, why my skin is dark. You know, I didn't have somebody explain to me where my music comes from. You know, like those are in textbooks for non-Black people. Black people here, we have to look for those books. They're not readily available to us. So it's very exhausting having to explain all the time. And I think the one thing that I do appreciate from my non-Black friends right now, I feel like a lot of them are taking the time to just find the resources, understand the history, understand the oppression, so that they can be a part of the change.
I think that leads on really well to the next question, and that is, what would you say to someone in front of you who was white at this time, in terms of what they can do, in terms of understanding it from your point of view, what you're going through? What would you say to them right now if they was in front of you?
The first thing, because I have been having these conversations all weekend and all week, the first thing that I always lead with like an emotional understanding. And I think that what we have to realize is that white people also are now waking up to their own privilege and kind of seeing a demon that they didn't have to deal with. And that's heavy for anybody to deal with, you know? So the first thing I say is, hey, this is a part of you that maybe you have realized or you haven't realized. And I recognize that it hurts. I recognize that it's going to take some time for you to understand that these are things that you didn't have to deal with. And not because you were a bad person, you did it on purpose, but because that's how the system worked for you. And then I would go into explaining, like, I am okay explaining. There are people that are not okay explaining. But it's time to understand the history of Black people in America, Black people across the world. It's time to understand that, and then understand how you can actually be an ally in this fight for change. And when you have questions and when you have curiosities, if somebody doesn't want to explain to you, don't get offended. You know, do the work. And if somebody does want to explain to you, appreciate that person, because they're doing work that a lot of Black people are just tired of doing. So
that's really good. And Keiran, do you have anything to add to that?
That was pretty much it. But I would like to say, I just want to share like something that I think could help. Basically, I don't have all the answers. Through what I read, through what I understand, power respects power. In this day and age, it's very hard to assert or assume power. But everyone worldwide understands this is power, no matter what. I'm not trying to compare the Holocaust to slavery, it's incomparable. But every white man or German man or whatever today born knows that they have to pay for their ancestors, like monetarily pay for their ancestors' wrongdoings. I truly believe until a generation, it's not going to be this one, but until a generation coming up sees that I had to pay for what my ancestors done, I don't think they're truly ever going to understand. But it's good for the ones that do understand that. And I'm seeing some things that are going a bit too far, because when you have people on your side, the best thing you can do is as she said, explain to them, because the passion you can exude onto them. The best teachers are passionate teachers. You know that, Shinnel. The passionate teachers, the kids feel it. They want to understand. The next generation is not going to hear it from somebody who's just saying it like it's just textbook. Okay, we hurt Black people. Okay, it has to be felt here, like, and then we'll start to see real change. But other than that, what she said.
And then on the reverse then, what would you say to someone in front of you who was Black?
Ooh. One, I feel like the only thing I really can say right now is that we'll be okay. It's been so emotional. I mean, even down to my father, who was very military, who was very stern, straight, unemotional. He's had a very emotional week. And this is somebody who has fought for this country, believes in this country. And for him to kind of come to terms with the racial injustices he's experienced in being in the military, and like accepting that this great country maybe has its faults too, is that it's going to be okay, that take care of yourself, and don't be so easily offended. I think that because we are in such a sensitive place right now, things are huge triggers for Black people. So I think that understand that some non-Blacks are really trying to learn and really trying to understand, and they're going to ask questions in ways that they don't realize can be a trigger for you. And you don't have to explain if you don't want to, or if you want to accept the responsibility of explaining, make sure that it comes from a true and genuine place.
And I'd say to all Black people, just know that we come from a place of love. We have love in our heart. And that's why sometimes, even me as a young Black man, I get militant thoughts and, let's do the military. But deep down, please know that we are people of love. That's why we protest. The majority will protest, and we're asking, please give us what we don't want to be more than anybody, just a little bit on the level with everybody else. I'm so glad, when I say glad, rest in peace George Floyd and every single other person whose name was mentioned, and people whose names we've left out, who's had to lead to get into this stage. But I don't know if I've ever been so happy to be Black. Like, I'm the proud Black person, but like being Black right now, I've never seen, like, I never thought Black people was together. You know, we talk like, oh, we have these little sayings around Black people, like Indians are together and these ones are together and these ones are together. Like, I feel like Black people are together. Whether we're gonna use that and take it to that level, I'm praying for that part. But like, there's a togetherness. Like, I'm a big energy person, and right now my spirit, like, it's warm. So just love yourself, black people.
I'm a bit like emotional.
I literally have a tear like coming down my eye as we speak, just because it is.
Yeah.
I don't want to be like the really gay one, but but what you said, like what Keiran, like what both of you've just said, is kind of like, do you not hit home? There's never been a time where we've been more proud. Do you know, we are one. We are like unified. We're sticking together, and together we will make a change. Whether it's today, whether it's tomorrow, whether it's next week, whether it takes a few more years, there will be a change, and we will make a change. People haven't died in vain. And it's really unfortunate that we had to get to that stage, that we had to see the video of a white man kneeling on a black man's neck on the floor, lifeless. It's such a shame that we had to get to that point for this to happen. But it's unfortunate, but I think there will be a change. And I think it's really important that once the rioting and the looting and the protests and the hashtags do stop, that we don't forget this, and we don't think it's over now. This needs to carry on. We can't stop the process that we're on. We just need to carry on. We need to work together to make the change, because if we're not working together, and if we're not carrying this on for years to come, then it will just be another hashtag that gets lost, and it will have to take someone else to die for us to remember there was a Black Lives hashtag. But yeah, sorry.
No, you hit it on the head. Don't apologize at all, please.
I think I just want to say definitely 100% just thank you to both of you for coming on. I think myself not being black, I can only understand, like, I could never understand, in fact, the sort of hardships that you guys are going through. But having experienced subtleties of racism, I know how that makes me feel. So only imagining what that means to all black people, and that it has to happen countless times over and over again for you guys to feel like you have some form of a voice. I can only imagine what that feels like. So for me, it's all about educating myself, because I don't know everything, and also educating other people. And I hope that, you know, what you both had to say today, someone will listen to it and it will provoke some type of action, some type of thought. It will just provoke a change in them. That means that it's one less person that we have to deal with. And so, you know, I know that it was really emotional, tough at some points to talk about it. But I think, yeah, you guys have, you know, you've taken an extra mile and you've done your bit to sort of educate the masses and those who will listen to this podcast. So I just want to say thank you again. And yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate you guys asking. I'm glad I can spread light. And again, it's my experience, you know, so there's so much more, but you know, I'm glad we're having the conversation. I'm glad that we have allies overseas that are willing to have the conversation with people here. It means a lot. It really does.
Absolutely. And of course, I just want to add as well that for anyone who is listening, like we said, our intention was not to offend anyone. So I just want to add the disclaimer that anything that was said on this podcast is the views of those people only. And so don't be offended. And if you are, then woo chow.
Guys, pleasure. Great conversation.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It was great. It was wonderful.
Bye.